The glittering facade of Forrester Creations has always masked a treacherous underbelly of familial betrayal, corporate espionage, and deeply rooted psychological warfare, but nothing could have prepared the fashion world for the catastrophic events. For weeks, the tension has been mounting to an unbearable degree, a pressure cooker of ambition and resentment waiting for a single spark to ignite a devastating explosion. Brooke Logan Forrester, a woman who has dedicated her life, her blood, and her tears to the Forrester legacy, believed that her time had finally come to ascend to the co-CEO throne. She had strategized, she had pleaded, and she had placed her ultimate faith in the hands of her husband, Ridge Forrester. But Ridge, paralyzed by his historical cowardice and manipulated by the emotional blackmail of his daughter, Steffy Forrester Finnegan, failed her in the most spectacular and humiliating way imaginable. Instead of the crown she so rightfully deserved, Ridge presented Brooke with an original Forrester couture dress, a condescending, insulting pacifier meant to silence her righteous ambition and keep her obediently in her place. When Ridge handed over that magnificent, shimmering garment, he fundamentally misunderstood the profound psychological damage he was inflicting upon his wife. To Ridge, it was a beautiful peace offering, a testament to his love and his desire to avoid a brutal corporate civil war. But to Brooke, the rustling silk and intricate beadwork felt like a heavy, suffocating shroud being draped over her dignity. It was a glaring, undeniable physical manifestation of her eternal second-class status within the Forrester hierarchy. She realized in that agonizing, heart-stopping moment that no matter how much she sacrificed, no matter how fiercely she loved, she would never be viewed as an equal. She would always be the outsider, the beautiful mannequin meant to wear the clothes, but never the visionary leader trusted to sit at the head of the boardroom table. The dress was not a gift, it was a brilliantly cruel insult, a reminder that Steffi's childish, entitled demands would always eclipse Brooke's lifetime of dedication. The crushing weight of this realization did not merely break Brooke's heart, it shattered the fragile psychological foundation she had spent years meticulously rebuilding. Left alone with the echoing silence of her shattered dreams, the profound devastation began to metastasize into an unbearable, suffocating agony. The walls of her opulent home seemed to close in on her, mocking her failure and her foolish optimism. It was in this terrifying abyss of despair that the dark, seductive whisper of her oldest, most destructive demon returned. The bottle, which had remained firmly corked through years of hard-won sobriety, suddenly called out to her with a siren song of numbness and oblivion. Brooke's hands trembled violently as she reached for the liquor, her rational mind screaming in protest, but her shattered soul begging for an escape from the excruciating pain of Ridge's ultimate betrayal. As the burning, amber liquid cascaded down her throat, it did not bring the peaceful oblivion she had so desperately craved. Instead, the alcohol acted as a volatile accelerant, igniting the dormant embers of her rage into a roaring, uncontrollable inferno. The numbness she sought was instantly replaced by a blinding, intoxicating clarity of vengeance. Every slight, every insult, every condescending smirk Steffi had ever directed at her or her daughter flashed before her eyes in a dizzying, maddening montage. The alcohol stripped away her maternal warmth, her diplomatic grace, and her carefully cultivated patience, leaving behind a raw, feral creature consumed by a singular, violent purpose. Brooke Logan was no longer mourning her lost promotion. She was mourning the systematic annihilation of her family's respect, and she was ready to demand a blood sacrifice in return. This terrifying descent into alcoholic madness was not an isolated internal collapse. It was heavily fueled by the venomous, radicalized energy of her daughter, Hope Logan Spencer. For weeks, Hope had been pushed to her absolute breaking point by Steffi's tyrannical leadership. The callous, unapologetic cancellation of the Hope for the Future line had deeply traumatized Hope, transforming her from a beacon of optimism into a hardened, bitter warrior. Hope had poured her hatred, her frustration, and her unyielding demand for justice directly into her mother's ear, acting as the dark muse to Brooke's impending tragedy. In her intoxicated state, Brooke could hear Hope's voice echoing in her mind, a relentless drumbeat demanding retribution. Hope's righteous fury became Brooke's weaponized mandate, convincing the inebriated matriarch that violence was the only language the Forrester family would ever truly understand. Blinded by this toxic cocktail of alcohol, betrayal, and maternal vengeance, Brooke navigated the darkened streets of Los Angeles, her vehicle slicing through the night like a missile locked onto its target. When she arrived at the towering glass and steel monolith of Forrester Creations, the building was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling, chaotic energy of the daytime operations. The silent, empty corridors felt like the twisting pathways of a labyrinth, leading her directly into the belly of the beast. Brooke's heels clicked ominously against the polished marble floors, a rhythmic countdown to the catastrophic confrontation that was about to unfold. She was a woman possessed, stripped of her humanity and driven entirely by the primal, intoxicating urge to reclaim the dignity that had been so ruthlessly stolen from her bloodline. Inside the opulent, dimly lit CEO office, Steffy Forrester Finnegan sat behind the massive, imposing desk, completely unaware of the deadly storm rapidly approaching her sanctuary. Steffy was basking in the arrogant glow of her recent, total victory. She had successfully manipulated her father, emotionally blackmailed him into submission, and firmly protected her absolute power over the company. She had crushed Hope's dreams, alienated Zend, and humiliated Brooke, all while maintaining her delusion of righteous corporate leadership. Steffy felt invincible, an untouchable queen ruling over her fashion empire with an iron fist. She was reviewing design portfolios, her mind occupied with profit margins and quarterly projections, blissfully ignorant of the fact that her ruthless, bullying tactics had finally pushed a fragile soul past the point of no return. Brooke slipped into the executive suite with the terrifying, silent grace of a predator. Her glassy, bloodshot eyes immediately locked onto the massive mahogany desk, and more specifically, onto a gleaming, silver paper knife resting innocently beside a stack of documents. To a rational mind, it was a mundane office accessory, a tool for opening correspondence. But to Brooke, swimming in a dangerous sea of high-proof alcohol and homicidal rage, the cold, sharp steel looked like an instrument of divine justice. Her trembling fingers wrapped tightly around the ornate handle, the tactile sensation of the weapon grounding her chaotic thoughts into a single, terrifying objective. The transformation was complete. The loving mother and celebrated chemist had vanished, replaced by a desperate, dangerous woman holding a blade. When Brooke finally stepped out of the shadows and revealed herself, the sheer horror of the situation paralyzed Steffy in her leather executive chair. The smug, victorious smirk instantly evaporated from Steffy's face, replaced by a mask of absolute, unadulterated terror. The heavy, unmistakable stench of hard liquor immediately assaulted Steffy's senses, a horrifying confirmation that the woman standing before her was not in her right mind. Brooke's face was contorted into a grotesque mask of hatred, her hair disheveled, her breathing ragged and heavy. The silence of the office was shattered by Brooke's slurred, venomous voice, a guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very depths of hell itself. "You stole everything," Brooke screamed, her voice cracking with the weight of decades of accumulated agony. She advanced slowly, the silver blade catching the dim light of the desk lamp. "You stole my daughter's future. You stole my husband's spine. You stole every last ounce of dignity the Logan family ever possessed." The accusations flew like poisoned arrows, piercing the quiet sanctity of the room. Brooke unleashed a lifetime of grievances, explicitly comparing Steffy's tyrannical, childish reign to the darkest, most manipulative days of Stephanie Forrester's rule. She painted Steffy as a spoiled, entitled brat who destroyed lives for sport, a ruthless dictator who needed to be violently dethroned. The sheer volume and intensity of Brooke's alcoholic rage pinned Steffy to her seat, her mind racing desperately for a way to de-escalate the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. Before Steffy could even attempt to reason with her intoxicated stepmother, Brooke lunged forward with terrifying, unexpected speed. In a fraction of a second, the physical distance between them vanished, and Steffi found herself violently pinned against the high back of her chair. The cold, razor-sharp edge of the paper knife was pressed dangerously close to Steffi's throat, mere centimeters separating the young CEO from a fatal, bloody tragedy. The palpable tension in the room was suffocating. Brooke's eyes were wild, completely devoid of reason or mercy, staring into Steffi's terrified soul with the cold, calculating gaze of an executioner. For the first time in her incredibly privileged life, Steffi Forrester Finnegan realized that her power, her title, and her money were entirely useless against a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. In that agonizing, suspended moment, with the cold steel hovering near her jugular, Steffi's entire life flashed before her widening eyes. The arrogant invincibility that had defined her recent executive decisions crumbled into dust, replaced by a primal, desperate instinct for basic survival. She thought of her beautiful children, Finn, and the devastating, unimaginable reality of them growing up without a mother. A sudden, sickening realization washed over her. Her relentless, unapologetic bullying, her refusal to compromise, and her cruel dismissal of Hope and Brooke's feelings had directly manifested this terrifying monster holding a blade to her neck. She had pushed the Logans too far, treating them like disposable collateral damage in her corporate games, and now, the bill had come due in the most horrific, violent way possible. A desperate, violent physical struggle erupted in the confines of the CEO office. Steffi, fueled by the pure adrenaline of survival, brought her hands up to desperately grip Brooke's wrists, fighting with every ounce of her strength to keep the lethal blade away from her flesh. The two women thrashed violently against the desk, sending heavy crystal paperweights, expensive laptops, and framed family photographs crashing to the floor in a chaotic symphony of destruction. Steffi screamed for help, her voice raw and panicked, while Brooke grunted in exertion, her alcoholic strength making her a terrifyingly formidable opponent. The struggle was ugly, brutal, and devoid of any of the glamorous sophistication that usually define their fierce rivalry. It was a raw, primal fight for life and death, an ugly manifestation of the toxic poison that had infected their families for generations. Fate, however, had orchestrated a miraculous intervention. Just down the hallway, Carter Walton was working late, his mind heavily burdened by the prophetic warnings he had delivered earlier that day. Carter had already dealt with Zen's explosive, heartbreaking meltdown in this very office, and his nerves were frayed from the escalating corporate instability. When the muffled, terrified screams echoed down the marble corridor, Carter's blood ran cold. His instincts, honed by years of managing Forrester crises, kicked in instantly. He abandoned his paperwork and sprinted down the hallway with the speed and determination of an Olympic athlete, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs as the sounds of the violent struggle grew louder and more desperate. Carter burst through the heavy double doors of the CEO office, just as Brooke, utilizing a terrifying surge of adrenaline, managed to overpower Steffi's defensive grip. The blade was descending, a fatal arc of silver aimed directly at Steffi. Without a single second of hesitation, Carter launched his massive frame across the room, tackling Brooke with a precise, forceful maneuver that knocked the breath from her lungs. The impact sent both Carter and Brooke tumbling to the carpeted floor, the paper knife skittering harmlessly away into the dark corner of the room. Carter quickly and expertly pinned the hysterical, thrashing Brooke to the ground, his voice a booming, authoritative command demanding that she stop, demanding that she surrender to reality. The immediate aftermath of the physical intervention was a scene of unparalleled, tragic devastation. Steffi collapsed over her desk, gasping desperately for air, her entire body shaking violently as the reality of her near-death experience washed over her in terrifying waves. On the floor, the adrenaline and the alcohol suddenly betrayed Brooke, leaving her completely drained and broken. She stopped fighting Carter and instead curled into a fetal position, releasing a series of gut-wrenching, hysterical sobs that echoed mournfully through the ruined office. The intoxicating rage had evaporated, leaving behind the crushing, undeniable truth of her horrific actions. Her sobriety was shattered, her dignity was gone, and she had crossed an unforgivable, criminal line that could never, ever be uncrossed. This catastrophic, near-fatal confrontation is not merely a dramatic climax, it is the absolute, definitive point of no return for the Forrester and Logan families. The corporate disagreements, the snide remarks, and the boardroom power plays have been violently eclipsed by an attempted murder fueled by addiction and vengeance. Ridge Forrester will now be forced to look upon the horrifying monster his cowardice and betrayal helped create, realizing that his insulting dress was the catalyst for a tragedy that nearly cost his daughter her life. The fashion world of Los Angeles is about to be engulfed in a bloody, unforgiving war, one where the battle lines are drawn not with fabric and thread, but with deep psychological trauma, shattered sobriety, and the terrifying glint of a silver blade. The bold and the beautiful will never be